It's space weather! And there's a lot to cover, so let's look at the sun on 304 angstroms to see there are no sunspots and not a lot going on the solar disk. There is a small uptick in solar wind density, and we can see some coronal holes rotating through. Otherwise, solar activity very weak. Here are the magnetic lines at 171 angstroms. And there have been some on-again, off-again coronal hole sun-to-earth connections. Looking at the real-time solar wind, BTBZ, let's see. BT, we got significant energy still. And regarding the BZ, nothing too serious going on there, right near the zero line. We do see some connections to coronal holes in these areas. And actually one has just subsided right there. Solar wind density down to 0.21 protons per cubic centimeter. Solar wind speed dropped down to 335. Now there was an uptick in the solar wind density. Let's look at some more data. Head to spaceweathernews.com. Go look at the X-ray flux, utterly flatlined. I'm not even so sure if that's missing data or if that's just not enough X-ray flux to measure on that scale. You can see we've had some very low densities in the solar wind. And I thought I saw a spike. No, there's a little spike right here. Not sure if that's an anomaly or what's going on with that, but that data is pretty shot. Now, we predicted a magnetometer spike, and we're getting some very odd-looking data on the GOES magnetometer also. Check that out. Not sure what's up with that, if that dropped down off the scale. We did not receive the magnetic pulse we were expecting. That could come any minute. And we'll be looking at the Gong 2 in a second. KP index is now at 2. Here's your Cygnets forecast. We'll let that play through. That's through the 16th. We are expecting some coronal hole wind stream to be coming through any time now. And when that happens, we'll see a dip in the electron flux. That could happen anytime also. And the F2 ionosphere layer is looking a little bit on the charged side right now. And once again, we're expecting a large charge disparity as the sun moves in this direction. Here's your aurora forecasts. And I just want to bring your attention to 1 minute here for the 10.7 centimeter radio flux, which is not listed on this site, but I thought it was. Ha! All right. Let's see, there's the electron fluence, okay. Planetary AP index and the sunspot number progression. Here's the Gong 2. Keep in mind this data is 1 hour, 27 minutes old. And what we're looking at here is this zone right here, where you see straighter magnetic lines. Yeah, the Earth is just about to connect to that, so we're going to see a spike in that magnetometer at any time. You thought it would be a little less than 24 hours yesterday. Apparently it's a little more than 24 hours. So let me stop that for a minute. So this area right here, when this rotates around to Earth facing, this line is going to snap into there. And when that happens, you'll see a spike in the magnetometer. It won't be a big spike, but that will explain the sudden change. Let that play through again just so you see how that's working. Shortly after that, in a few days, the Earth will cross the heliospheric current sheet again, and we'll end up with the North Pole influence as opposed to the South Pole influence. Moving on, go back to the last 10 hours of earthquakes at globalincidentmap.com. We've got a 5.0 in Indonesia at depth, so they should stay on alert for a 5+. Let's see. 2 4.9s, that's only one quake. 4.9 in New Zealand. 5.1 in Indonesia. 4.9 in Indonesia. Puerto Rico gets another 2.9 at depth. 4.5 in Indonesia. 4.1 in Russia. 4.5 in Russia. And a 4.5 at depth in Japan. Japan should stay on alert for a 5 in that area. Lastly, let's look at this one. North of Vostok, Russia. Not to be confused with Lake Vostok, Antarctica. This is near the Kamchatka Peninsula, where there's been a lot of stuff going on lately. Now, that's a 571 kilometer deep quake, which should put them on alert for a 5+ magnitude in that area. Moving on. VolcanoDiscovery.com. Today's volcanoes. Shiva Luch now emitting an ash plume up to 20,000 feet of altitude. Explosive activity continues. Kadavar in New Guinea. Discrete emissions to flight level 8,000 of volcanic ash. Mount Ibu in Indonesia. 7,000 foot ash plume there. Dukono, 7,000 foot ash plume. Fuego. Volcanic ash detected in satellite. Sabancaya, 27,000 foot ash plume. And Planchon Petaroa, continuous ash emissions. Next, let's look at cosmic rays. We'll leave links to all of these articles, by the way. This is a Russian site that's got all the cosmic ray links, or a lot of really good cosmic ray links. We did see a spike in Athens, so we wanted to show you. There's the highest cosmic rays we've had in Athens for a few days. Not a huge spike, but an uptick. Next, we'll look at Mexico City. Somewhat in agreement there. Keep in mind it's on a different part of the planet. Here's Moscow, also receiving a slight spike. Keep in mind Moscow's range is always a larger range than these other cosmic ray monitors. And let's also look at Oulu, which actually just in the last hour has had a little spike there. But overall, on a daily basis, not any sort of an uptick at all at Oulu. DOMC, Antarctica, has received a significant spike. Highest levels there since January 3rd. And DOMB also received a spike. So, some correlated data there at the Antarctica neutron monitors. Moving on. Alright, let's talk proxies for solar output. The 10.7 centimeter radial flux has been a measurement of solar activity since 1947. And if you look here, here's the last 10 days. We're looking at this because solar activity is so low. This is a way to measure it when there are no sunspots. So, 10.7 centimeter radial flux yesterday was 70. The day before 68, so there's a small uptick. Here's the averages for the last 12 months, which are very close to 70. And as far as solar minimum forecasting goes, check out those numbers. Forecast in 12 months is for it to be down at, let's see, in 2020, 1 year from now, 10.7 centimeter radial flux is forecasted to be all the way down to 62.2, an incredibly low level. Alright, so regarding the 10.7 centimeter radial flux, this is a proxy of the sunspot data. The sun is forever emitting a 2800 megahertz radio signal. And when we measure the wattage of that signal, That lines up almost perfectly with the sunspot number. We'll leave links to this article also. If you don't know about the 10.7 centimeter radio flux, it's an important aspect of solar monitoring. Now let's look at some geospace magnetosphere movies. Here's the velocity, which is derived from a very low solar wind speed and a very low solar wind density. This is going to be all over the place. Don't freak out, that's what happens to the magnetosphere when the solar wind is so weak. Here's the density. You can see lower density solar wind coming in there from the left, which appears lighter on this scale. And it gets very, very diffuse at the end. Check this out. That's what you call practically no solar wind. Next, let's look at the pressure as it drops off, as it did yesterday. If anything raises your cosmic ray risk levels, it's that. That play through. Watch the pressure in the magnetosphere just poof. Here it goes. See ya. Now let's look at magnetic perturbations over the poles. As you can see, there is still magnetism on your planet, despite the weak solar wind. And you see it like an outgoing magnetic spike there at the end. Let's take a look at how this affects the rest of the planet. These models, courtesy of University of Michigan. Watch at the very end, there's going to be a pulse due to the lack of solar wind. Right there. Play that one more time. Next, let's talk about crypto for a quick minute. Yesterday we talked about yellow vest protesters calling for a run on the European Central Bank, where French investors take their money out of banks, get out of the euro, and get into crypto. Well, if that happened yesterday, it didn't produce any spike in crypto, because there's your 1 week chart on Bitcoin, and there's your 1 week chart on Ethereum. Let's go back to economics again. With the Zero Hedge article, soaring restaurant prices signal inflation is much higher than official data suggests. I don't know how many of you are aware, but the government uses the CPI data, Consumer Price Index, which is a basket of goods that they regularly change the goods in the basket to try to make it look like inflation's lower than it is. Now, we're expecting inflation to go up, especially because the government doesn't stop spending. So while the Fed has been raising interest rates, it's still not at an appropriate rate that we would suggest for lending. So anyway, we'll leave links to the article. The reason this happens is because restaurants have very low profit margins, and restaurants are forced to raise their prices based on actual inflation. Remember, inflation is when the purchasing power of your dollars goes down, making any asset measured in dollars worth a different amount. Since your dollar buys less, the more gets put into circulation. The Consumer Price Index isn't a real measure of inflation. It is a lagging indicator on its best day. Let's go to AP News. 3 dead and dozens injured in Paris bakery gas leak explosion. Bad times. It doesn't look like terrorism, folks. Just a gas leak. As if they don't have enough problems in Paris already. Powerful enough to overturn some cars. Moving on. Checking out the AccuWeather Doppler radar. See, that snow is moving up into the northeast. And it's just getting to a spot where it's over the top of my head. Also, we got some snow in central Arizona, as Missouri and Illinois continue to get buried. Here's the water vapor animation. And you can see that the jet stream is all broken up, as it's been doing recently over the U.S. And also, what's going on is you've got this dry line here and dry air down here, causing compression in this area, holding that storm in place. It's taking its time moving out. Now let's look at tropical tidbits real quick. Here's what's going on with the jet stream. Which you can see is curling all the way up. Curving all the way up like this into Canada. And then it's kind of reforming here off of the east coast. Also, we've got double and triple jet streams in the south. Jet stream meridional flow. It normally goes east to west when it's going north and south. That's a thing that happens during a weak magnetosphere. Check it out. Let it play through so you see the forecast. By the way, this is the 250 millibar upper level winds. Thanks for watching. Here's a view of the sun on 171 angstroms. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy the content. Please share on your social media. Help us get to 1,000 subscribers. And remember, when you're staring at a blank sun, don't drink. And if you drink, stare at a blank sun anyway. And don't drive.